You know, if you run these street stocks very long, you're going to tear some stuff up. And we've done a pretty good one on this right front, but it's not terrible. I've already ordered new parts and got started. Come on, let's get to it, get this thing fixed. Well, if you checked out our last video, you saw where we slammed off into the wall with the right front here. And I want to start here and show you. Okay, so on the rim, we smashed the lip down a pretty good way around it. Just ripped this rim. I'm not going to be able to straighten it out. And just folded that all up along the edge right there for that rim. All right, took a pretty good hit to do that right there. You can bend this outer lip out, you know, pretty easy, but when you start seeing it just folded all the way down in behind like where the rib is for the tire to sit in, you've taken a pretty hard hit. Okay, so I know I've gotten a pretty hard hit this time. I've already been through, I had to get parts ordered and stuff, but I wanted to talk about going through diagnosis and everything. Upper control arm, of course, one of your easiest points that you can bend is that upper ball joint. I have replaced this upper ball joint. I'm going to show you. You can see that that was bent. All right. And anyway, so upper ball joints. And I'll tell you, an easy way to check these is to put 2 nuts on them. Like you can take this and with it mounted in it, you can put 2 nuts on this and put an impact or something on it and spin it. And so both of my ball joints were bent, and I'll show you that here in a minute. We'll do that. And what I usually do is just lay my thumb beside it like this. And what I'm doing is I'm feeling to feel if my thumb is going, you know, getting bump, 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 bump like that. Because it is very hard to see it. And it can be there, it can cause a problem. You know, I don't want bent ball joints in that equation messing me up. So with this one, it is there. It's, you know, can't see it as much as I can feel it. So we replaced it. Just eliminate that as a possible issue that could bite us without realizing. Crossbar right there can bend fairly easy. This one's good. If you bend your crossbar, you're not going to get free rotation anymore. If you've got bind and this feels like it's springy, like so when you rotate it up or down, it springs, it gets harder to push one way or the other, that's a real good indication that your crossbar has gotten bent. Can sometimes be straightened out, especially if it's steel. I'm not scared to straighten a steel one if I can make it work smoothly afterwards. That's fine. Like this is an aluminum one, probably would scrap it. All right, so I got that done. The other thing to check is to make sure that the plate that your ball joint is bolted to is flat in line with your bar. So this horizon for where this bolts down is still in a plane flat to where this bolts up on the back, the 2. If that's got twist in it, then this is going to be bound up. You're going to have problems. If you can't straighten it, replace it. All right, so that's my upper. Good to go. All right, on my lower here, of course, I had to replace my lower ball joint. That's just a 6145 in there. I got that replaced. But the other thing, we're on solid bushings, and I just took it apart and checked it and made sure it would take a horrendous hit to tear up those solid bushings on the back there. But you could do it, or you could stretch it and make one bind. So like for example, we could take a hit so hard that the mount itself gets pushed, gets tweaked, and so there's not alignment anymore between the 2 bolts. And now it's got bind when I go up or down. It'll do that same thing where it binds up as I move it. And if that's the case, you've got to fix it, whether it's beating the mount back in place, you know, re-drilling the hole and putting a washer on it, whatever you have to do. But you do have to fix that. For us, we're fine. Wasn't that hard a hit. The other area that we should be concerned about as far as damage that can really mess us up on our setup is our steering arm on our spindle itself. All right, I'm going to take this and put it over on the bench, and let's talk about the spindle, checking it and everything. All right, on the spindle itself, it's a couple of things I'm looking at here. All right, and you can do this on the car. This doesn't have to be off on the shop. I was just trying to make it where I could show it a little better. First thing I'm going to do, I'm going to check and see, are my bearings still preloaded the same way? You know, in other words, is everything, am I suddenly tight when I'm turning this or loose, either one? If I'm tight, if all of a sudden this is turning really tight, that's a good indication that the spindle itself has bent, because you know, you've got your 2 races with your bearings sitting in between them. Even a very slight bend in that at all would make these bearings bind up. Very unlikely, would take a horrendous wreck to do it, but if for some reason you feel bind now in this rotor when you spin it, probably done ruined that spindle, probably already bent it. Another thing too is the actual spindle shaft itself, you know, in the assembly, getting bent. More than likely you're going to see a crack. You're going to see, of course, your paint broke, something going on back here. If you've got that kind of damage, very unlikely. It would take a horrendous wreck to be at that level. But it's something to check for. Another point, if the spindle itself has bent in the housing like that, your brake is going to hang up because your rotor is no longer going to sit correctly to your brake mount right here. And so now all of a sudden you're going to have your brake pads and everything are going to be sitting cocked at an angle. They're going to be bound up. You're going to have problems there as well. So those are real good indicators. I'm not even really worried about it at that level. This is not that kind of wreck. But what can happen and causes a ton of problems with setups after a wreck is especially if you get a hard hit on the back side of the wheel or the front side of the wheel. If you get top or bottom overall, you're typically just going to ruin ball joints. But if you take a hard shot to the front or the back, it is very easy to be in your steering arm right here. And this is that 7377 and also a Camaro F-body spindle right here. And so they've got a really beefy arm, and this one here is one that's one of the forged ones. So it's super tough and everything, but of course on a metric, that's a completely different story. Now, how do you know if it's bent? Well, it's two major things that you're wanting to look for. You're wanting to look for bent in and out, and you're wanting to look for twist. It won't bend up and down as much as it will. You'll have twist or the whole thing in or out, and it can just cause you all kind of havoc. A real good indication there would be is, you know, your ball joints aren't bent, but your toe in or toe out number has changed dramatically. You know, so if you were towed out a 1/4 inch and now all of a sudden, you know, you got good ball joints in it and everything, and you put it all back together and your toe out is a 1/2 inch, an inch, or, you know, 0, you know, or, you know, something along those lines, more than likely, even if it looks right, it could be twisted. Seeing that's moving your tie rod in is what is happening. Now, how do we measure it? How do we check it? Well, there's two things going on here. One, and this, I figured this out. This is the simple way to do this. You can compare this side to side. Real good idea to write your numbers down. And I had wrote my numbers down, but I checked that distance right there at the furthest point out on the rotor. And like this one is 2.77, 2 inches and 770 thousandths is what this measures. And I had 2 inches, 750 thousandths wrote down. Okay, and the other side is like 200. It's like 2 inches, 760 thousandths is what my other side is. And of course, that can vary a little side to side because, you know, I drilled these out to put these 5/8 bolts in and everything. So they're not going to be exactly the same. I'm not worried about 10, 20, 30, 40, even 50,000. But if I see that I have moved by 100,000, 0.1 of an inch, 0.2 of an inch, 0.3, we've got a problem. We've got to fix that, okay? And so that's the way to look at that. You know, 40, 50 thousandths right here, we'll adjust that out. We're not really going to cause a problem in the car. Now you say, okay, well, what problem would you cause, Jason? Well, you're affecting your bump steer, okay? So this position in and out, in position 2, your lower control arm, that ratio, those angles between the two, as you move this in or out, you're affecting your bump steer. And moving it in or out is affecting your Ackerman. You know, Ackerman is where, like, when you turn to the left, you know, or right, you know, depending on, you know, which side of the world you're on. But Ackerman is when you're going around the track and you turn into the turn, that inside wheel turns in more than the outside wheel does because the radius of the track is smaller on the inside of the car than it is on the outside. And anyway, so that's Ackerman. And like on this spindle right here with the setup I've got, it has great Ackerman for the factory. I'm not messing with it, but if I bend this way in or out, I'm going to wreck that, okay? So that's important from that standpoint, all right? So I'm fine here. I know this hasn't been bent in or out, all right? And this is a Ford spindle, so I could fix it. I could heat and bend and fix this on this spindle. If it's a cast spindle, you're going to need to replace it. Now, what's the other thing? Well, the other thing is twist. It's very easy to twist one, especially if your bump steer setup requires you to have your tie rod, you know, or your heim joint way down here like that. That's a lot of leverage that it can create to twist it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take and I'm going to look right here, and I'm 88.6. Of course, it's just sitting on the table. It doesn't matter. And then right here, I am 89.6. So I have 1 degree difference between my pin and my rotor, and that's fine. I had wrote down 2 degrees difference is what I had wrote down when I originally did these and everything. 1 degree, I'm not concerned with that at all. That's very, very minor. That's going to be a few thousandths difference in my setup. When would I be concerned? I would be concerned if I had wrote down 2 degrees and now all of a sudden I've got -10 or +10 or -20 or +20. You know, that's twist, okay? That's going to be a measurable issue. Same deal. You're moving your point on your tie rod in or out, because when you twist this, now you're changing where that ball on the bottom of it is rotating at, changing your bump, changing your Ackerman, changing all your setup and everything. And this one right here can bite you when you wreck a car mid-season and you think you've done everything, but the car's not driving the same anymore. Because, like, you could wreck it, you put it all back together, you put new ball joints and stuff in it, and it looks right. But in that process, you readjust and you correct your toe, and you have messed your bump up, and you haven't realized it. You know, you've caused yourself a problem. When I put all this back together, I'm going to check my bump again, make sure. I might need to, you know, put a shim in, take a shim out. I may need to change my bump. I don't think I will, because I think I haven't had any significant movement at all. But it needs to be checked every time, because it's very easy to get this arm right here bent. And even though you've got your toe set correctly, the car seems to be driving right, you know, it's like it's just not quite what it was. It's not the same, and you start chasing your car again. So just be aware. When you're assembling this, don't forget to turn your hole for your cotter pin sideways where you can get to it. I have had one I had turned the wrong way, and it just makes life difficult. All right, let's talk about this runt shock for a second. So this is this Gorilla Fist 500, which is 500 pounds of rebound, 130 pounds of compression on 100 pounds of nitrogen gas. Seemed to be working good. Was running it. I over-compressed. When I slammed the lower control arm up into the frame, I had to stop here to keep it from getting into the shock. Just blew right through that, crushed it into the bottom of the frame. And so what it done was it just shoved the top down into the shock on these threads right here and ruined the shock, blew the gas out, blew the oil out and everything. I think the shock is still, I think all my internals and everything is still straight. I don't have any bends in the tube. Tube itself is ruined, but I'm going to send this back to Mr. J at BSB because this might be salvageable as far as I may just need a new tube and a new end cap or something and for it to be oiled and gassed up. I don't know. I'll just send it back to him and see. We'll hope. But with that said, that made me look really hard at my footage from that last episode with the GoPro on this right front and try to think like, am I sure I'm going in the right direction? How did it drive? What does the footage look like? You know, really just trying to give it some good hard thought of what's my next step. And I have made an executive decision, changing shock, all right? So this shock is out. I'm gonna have this repaired and I think we're gonna keep this, but I had put this long acre medium durometer 1.25 inch bump stop onto this right front because what I was doing is I was trying to be able to get the car freed up a little bit where that I wouldn't have to run as much bite in the car as I was to get it freed up on entry without it pushing out on exit. And so I had taken this approach. I don't know that I was getting the result that I wanted. I do think it was better. It was definitely better. But I'm looking at it, and of course, this is an evolving learning process. It's like, okay, I know what this does. When I looked at the footage, it looked like that I was engaging into the bump pretty quick, you know, and then the spring was progressively ramping up on rate, and so I was stopping the compression at that point. But I wasn't as deep into it as I wanted to be. It's like I wanted to be down more on the right front, I wanted to be deeper into that spring and hold, you know, in other words, with the right front at a lower point than what it was. And so I looked at that and I'm like, And so based on that, I'm like, okay, instead of going to a stiffer, taller bump to achieve that, because I think that took me in the wrong direction as far as dynamic ride height went. So that's out. I'm going to go back to the 3/4 inch spring rubber and put it in there. This is a little soft diameter, and of course it's only 3/4 of an inch from coil to coil on it. So that's going to let this spring get back down a little deeper before it starts rising up on its progressive rate. So we're going to put that in. And to free the car up, we in turn talked to Mr. J at BSB, and we bought a Gorilla Fist 800. And this is a lot of rebound. So it's 800 pounds of rebound, 130 pounds of compression, 100 pounds of nitrogen. Mr. J said the next up from this is a no bleed. So this is pretty much it. And when I looked at this, and when you take, I'll show y'all right quick. It's got 100 pounds of nitrogen, so it's not easy. But I want you to look. So that's 100 pounds of nitrogen sitting there pushing on that. And you see how slow that is. That's slow. So anyway, here's what I'm thinking. I'm going to get the car where it can get down on the right front and be able to run the bite to get the entry freed up that I want. You know, be able to run that 200 pounds of bite or 220 pounds of bite on the left rear to get that entry where I want it, nice and free. And attack this from a standpoint of putting a lot more rebound in the car so that timing wise, as I'm picking the throttle up, middle off, this shock's going to do its job and it's going to keep me from loading that left rear up too quick, making the car want to drive out in the turn. So we're going to take it this direction. I think this is going to be a little bit better way to attack it, because what I'm after is I'm after that perfect balance of a car that when I lift on the throttle, you know, smooth four-wheel braking, the car's nice and free on entry. I can roll it in, and then I can pick the throttle up immediately. And as I'm applying throttle, you know, I've got a shock set up that is holding the car in that turn, keeping me from, you know, letting it dynamically sit down too quick. Keep the throttle keep the throttle on it. And as I exit out, I'm just steadily stepping down on the throttle more. Shock's doing its job, letting it load into that left rear as I go off that corner and everything. So that's what I'm after, making that change. I think it's going to be a good change. Regardless, it's an evolving process, and we'll now understand the difference between basically I think the 500-pound rebound would equate to like a 14 versus the 800-pound rebound would equate to like a 21 rebound as far as those numbers, if you're familiar with them. So there's a pretty big change in rebound there. I should be able to feel that in the car and understand it. Hopefully that's going to give us a big edge on understanding exactly the changes in our setup and what that's doing on the track. I'm going to put the spring rubber up in the middle of the spring, and I am using the zip ties to keep it from moving around. I don't want it to migrate down to the bottom and get hung up, because if I want to change this at the track, I want to be able to get to it. And those zip ties keep it from falling out or jumping out or anything like that. So they're a good move. A couple more items. I broke my brake line over here. So when I tore that shock apart, it let my right front drop way down. And when it did, it pinched my brake line between the frame and the upper control arm. And I wasn't considering that as a failure mode, so I missed that. So I've got to really check when I put the new line on that's coming, make sure that the routing doesn't let it get pinched in between the two. And I probably put a chain on this right front where it couldn't extend down that far anyway, even if my shock did come apart or something. And then, that gets into, do I want to preload my right front? I don't know. I'm thinking we might want to load this thing down to ride height. So I'm getting some feedback. I got some friends giving me some advice, telling me I need to be looking at that. So maybe in a future episode on that part, y'all. Okay, other thing is, I missed this earlier. I wanted to cover this with y'all. Another thing that can bend, you know, this upper ball joint's #1 thing to get bent. #2, you know, the steering arm. And #3, or well, it's probably a #2, is the mount for the upper control arm itself right here. So this is a real common area to get bent easily. All right, so I've got this big 3/8 thick steel plate right here. You see these big gussets I've got on it. Does help some because I can just put a straight edge on it. You know, it's going to be really difficult for it to bend below that gusset right there that I've got. And so it's going to be obvious. You put a straight edge on it, it'll be bowed if you've bent it. But you can bend the entire frame. So this whole top plate right here can get twisted. And then the actual arm itself, the horn arm right here coming out, this whole thing can get twisted. You know, and of course, actually rip loose from the cross member back here, get a wrinkle in it, twist that up. So this could look straight because of the gussets and stuff, and the whole thing be out of whack. And I'm saying this because this is one of the reasons that I build my cars square and level on the jig, is just because of this. So I knew I had this frame on the jig completely level across, and I made sure that I put these upper control arm mounts on at 90 degrees. All right, and because of that, I just leveled the car crossways, you know, on my lift right here. And I made sure that the frame was sitting level. And so now I can just take my level and I can slap up here, you know, and I'm sitting at 89.8 degrees, you know, is what I'm at. Yeah, 89.9 degrees is what I'm at. And you know, this has only got a 0.3 resolution on my level here. And so that's telling me that I have not bent the control arm itself. You know, of course, it's flat. It doesn't have a bow or anything in it. But I haven't twisted it in the frame here, and I have not twisted the frame itself. And so that's one of the, you know, they talk about, you know, should we, you know, twist a frame when we build it, put it on the jig, and like, you know, put some twist in it and lower the right front, you know, horn, and, you know, raise and lower the left rear and do all this kind of weird stuff like this. Well, it makes it a nightmare when you're trying to figure out whether or not your car has gotten tweaked in a wreck. So I am 100% against that because this level right here, so if I know that this car was built completely square, I'm going through a wreck and I can just take this level and start putting on all these points, and it's going to tell me whether or not I've got a problem, what I need to do to fix it. All right, so let's bolt that back up. I ain't going to do y'all like that. We're going to talk about tying the right front. I'm not going to tease it. We're going to do it. All right, so look here. I got a 3/8 bolt right here. That's like a 3/8 by 2 inch, but it's all thread. And I want all those threads because that's adjustment in our tie down that we want to have in it, okay? It doesn't matter. You could take some threaded rod and cut off a piece and, you know, like all thread rod and do the same thing, or either get a bolt that's all threads because you're wanting to have that adjustability, all right? So I'm going to take this, throw it in the vise, okay? Now, this is some chain I ordered. This is just tie down. I'm using this for tie down chain. This is the smallest chain I think you can get away with, and it holds. And this is like 3/16 is what the size of that chain is right there. That is welded chain. I don't know what the rating of it is, but it's 3/16 thickness of the wall of it, and I would call this the smallest chain you can get away with for doing tie downs. All right, so what I'm gonna do here, I'm gonna weld the chain to the head of the bolt. Hadn't got to be pretty, but it does need to be straight. It needs to be straight up because as that front end beats against it, or rear end, wherever you're using it, as it beats against it, if you don't have that link welded straight up, it's going to bend it up, and then that's going to take adjustment out that you adjusted in. Make sure that you have it straight up, and I'll show you how we do that. Sit there. All right, yeah. I just want to make sure that it's standing straight up. That's what I'm after. All right, so that's the first step. Now we're going to figure out where to cut it off, and we're going to install it. All right, let's get it mounted. Now this one's easy. I want to be on the front because I've got my brake caliper and all of this going on the back. It's just going to be in the way on the back. And this lower control arm already has some holes in it, some mounts already there. Got a 3/8 hole from the factory in the perfect location. I'm going to use nylon stop nuts on this stuff because we're going to be, this would be something we're going to adjust. And what I've done is I took a jack and raised my jack stand up to where I got this preloaded just up to the point that I got my pressure off of my shock. All right, that's going to be my minimum. So that's where I'm going to cut the length off and be adjusted all the way out because I know I'm going to draw up from there. All right. So this would be my new minimum. I'm going to put the nylon stop nut on it and just run it up till it hits the nylon. That's plenty. All right, there it is. And then I'm going to turn around and I'm going to figure out, I want this to be right up at the top. I don't want my hole to be at the bottom of the frame because that doesn't give me any room for my links to give and get out of the way. If I bolt it right up here at the bottom of the frame down, then when the lower control arm comes up, I've got several links there that have a very small amount of room to be able to wiggle and get out of the way that could cause a bind. Because if I deadhead against the link instead of the spring, of course I'm going to get a push in that scenario. So I'm going to do it up top, and I am going to put her in. Where am I going to put it? I'm going to put it right. I think I'm going to put it right there. Yep, got me a little mark on it. A little mark on the frame. Should be a 3/8 hole. Let's see. Using a nylon stop nut here as well. Let's see if we, oh yeah. Now let's figure out cutting this chain off. That's going to be easy enough. I'll take you and I'm going to cut that link right there off. All right. That's done. Yeah, all right, so I know I've got the preload now sitting on the chain because my jack stand has come loose. All right, so I'm not on the shock. And then I've got another inch left of adjustment right here. See where I can draw that on down? And then like if I say, okay, it needs to, you know, I need more than that. Well, then I just go up a link on the chain is it, okay? So there's my minimum. That's where I start with it all the way out. And then I can go up from there. And it may be that we find if we want to preload it right down to ride height, we actually do drop down another link. But this is a good safe starting point. I'm going to keep my pressure off my shock by doing that. Yeah, it is a little bit below, or a little bit above ride height. I can just tell by the angle of my control arm. But it's a good safe starting point for it. Y'all, I'm not done with the repair on the car, but I am done with this video. Everything here is good to go. We're ready to go on this right front. I've still got repair I got to do on my center link as far as my linkages and stuff go. I've got a new steering sector that's got to be put on. I've got to repair my front bumper right here. I think I'm going to be able to fix it, put all my bodywork and stuff back on it. So I got a lot more to do, but I'm going to go ahead and stop this video here. That way it doesn't just stretch out too long. Just cover this section. Got another video coming right in behind this one where we're going to wrap everything up. Hey, if this is helping, hit the like button, leave me a comment. Let's get to that next video.